The moment my daughter-in-law pointed at me and said, "Get this pauper away from the table," I learned exactly how much respect money can buy and how quickly it disappears when people think you no longer have any. I am Margaret Hayes, 72 years old, and until that evening, I believed I knew my family. The dinner was supposed to be a celebration. My son Daniel had organized a large family gathering at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. More than 50 relatives, business associates, and close friends had been invited. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Soft piano music floated through the room. Every table was covered with fresh white roses and polished silverware. It looked like the kind of place where everyone felt important. I arrived a few minutes late because my flight had been delayed. After spending most of the day traveling, I was dressed more simply than usual. I wore a modest navy cardigan, comfortable shoes, and carried the same leather handbag I had owned for nearly 15 years. I was tired but happy. Family dinners had always meant something to me. As I stepped inside the private dining area, I immediately spotted Daniel at the far end of the room. Before I could wave, someone blocked my path. It was a young security guard. He looked nervous. "Ma'am, can I help you?" he asked politely. "Yes," I replied with a smile. "I am here for the Hayes family dinner." Before he could respond, I heard Vanessa's voice. Loud, sharp, impossible to ignore. There she is. The entire room seemed to pause. Vanessa stood from her chair and stared directly at me. Her designer dress sparkled beneath the lights. Her expression, however, held no warmth at all. "What is she doing here?" she asked. Several guests turned toward me. The security guard looked confused. I was confused too. "Vanessa?" I said softly. "Is everything all right?" She crossed her arms. "Security, please remove her from the family table." The room became silent. I thought I had misunderstood. "Excuse me?" I asked. Vanessa laughed lightly, as if she were discussing the weather. "This event is for family and invited guests. We cannot have random people walking in and pretending they belong here." A few nervous chuckles came from nearby tables. I felt my stomach tighten. Daniel remained seated. He did not stand. He did not speak. He simply looked down at his glass. "Vanessa," I said carefully, "I am Daniel's mother." Her smile widened. "And I am supposed to believe that?" The security guard glanced between us. He clearly wanted no part of the situation. "Ma'am," he said to me, "do you have identification?" I slowly reached into my purse. Around me, relatives watched in complete silence. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked amused. Not one person spoke on my behalf. Not one person said, "That is Margaret." Not one person said, "She belongs here." Then came the sentence I will never forget. Vanessa shook her head and said loudly enough for every guest to hear, "Get this pauper away from the table before she ruins the evening." A few people gasped. Others stared at their plates. I felt heat rise into my face, not from embarrassment, but from disbelief. Pauper. That was the word she chose. After all the years I had spent helping this family, after every sacrifice, after every check written quietly behind the scenes, after every problem solved without asking for recognition. Pauper. The security guard looked genuinely uncomfortable. "Ma'am, perhaps we should step outside for a moment," he said. I looked across the room one final time. My eyes stopped on Daniel. Surely my own son would say something. Surely he would stand up. Surely he would correct this humiliation before it went any further. Instead, he remained completely silent. And in that moment, standing alone in a room filled with people who knew exactly who I was, I began to realize that the dinner I thought was a celebration was about to reveal something far more important than family. I stood motionless as the security guard waited for my response. The silence around me felt heavier than any words Vanessa had spoken. What hurt was not simply the insult. It was the reaction of everyone else. Or rather, the lack of one. More than 50 people sat in that private dining room. Relatives, family friends, people who had attended holidays at my home, people who had accepted my kindness for years. Yet not one person stood up and said the obvious truth. The security guard cleared his throat awkwardly. "Ma'am, perhaps we can step outside and sort this out." I nodded slowly. Not because I agreed with Vanessa, not because I felt ashamed, but because I suddenly realized I was learning something important. When people believe you have nothing to offer them, they reveal exactly who they are. As we walked toward the entrance, I heard conversations beginning again behind me. Quiet whispers, nervous laughter, The sound of people pretending an uncomfortable situation was normal. Just before I reached the doorway, I turned and looked back. Daniel finally raised his eyes. For a brief moment, our gazes met. I waited. I hoped. Surely he would say something now. Surely he would tell everyone that the woman being escorted away was his mother. Instead, he looked away. That hurt far more than anything Vanessa had said. Outside the dining room, the security guard immediately relaxed. "I am sorry about this," he said quietly. "Something did not seem right." I offered a small smile. "You were simply doing your job." He nodded. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you really related to them?" I looked through the glass doors toward the dining room. "Very much so." His expression became even more uncomfortable. "I thought so." For several minutes, I sat alone in a chair near the lobby. Guests passed by occasionally. Most avoided eye contact. One woman I recognized from previous family events hurried past, as if she had never met me. Another gave me an apologetic smile, but kept walking. It was remarkable how quickly people distanced themselves from someone they believed had fallen in status. Then something unexpected happened. An older waiter approached me carrying a glass of water. He placed it gently on the table beside me. "Mrs. Hayes?" he asked. I looked up, surprised. "Yes." He smiled warmly. "I thought it was you." For the first time all evening, someone seemed genuinely happy to see me. "Have we met before?" I asked. "About 8 years ago," he said, "at a charity fundraiser downtown. My daughter received one of your education scholarships." I immediately remembered. "Emily Rodriguez?" His face brightened. "That is right." I smiled. "How is she doing?" "She graduated from medical school last year." Pride filled his voice. "Our family has never forgotten what you did." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he glanced toward the dining room. "I am sorry for what happened in there." I looked down at the glass of water. "Thank you." The waiter hesitated before continuing. "Sometimes people judge wealth by appearance. Sometimes they forget where success came from." His words stayed with me. After he returned to work, I remained seated for another 20 minutes. Not because I wanted to go back inside. Because I wanted to think clearly before reacting. Anger is easy. Clarity takes effort. Eventually, I stood and walked toward the exit. As I passed the dining room one final time, I noticed Vanessa laughing at the head table. Daniel sat beside her. Neither of them looked toward the door. Neither of them seemed concerned that I was leaving. That image followed me all the way home. And during the long drive through the city lights, a question repeated itself over and over in my mind. How had the people closest to me become so comfortable disrespecting the very person who had spent decades helping them succeed? That question stayed with me for days. I did not call Daniel. I did not send angry messages. I did not demand explanations. Instead, I sat quietly in my sunroom each morning with a cup of coffee and allowed myself to remember. Memory has a way of revealing truths that pride tries to hide. Looking back, I realized the signs had been there for years. The difference was that I had chosen not to see them. Daniel had not always been successful. When his father passed away 20 years earlier, he was overwhelmed by grief and uncertainty. He was a good man then, hardworking and humble, but life had not yet given him the confidence he carries today. After college, he struggled to keep a small consulting business alive. Some months he could barely cover rent. I remember sitting across from him at my kitchen table while he stared at a stack of unpaid bills. He was embarrassed. He hated asking for help. I helped anyway, not because I expected repayment, because he was my son. Over the years, that help grew. When his business needed operating capital, I provided it. When he wanted office space, I quietly guaranteed the lease. When the company faced a difficult year, I stepped in again. Each time, Daniel promised he would never forget. And for a long time, I believed him. Then Vanessa entered the picture. At first, I genuinely liked her. She was intelligent, ambitious, and charming. She remembered birthdays. She brought flowers when she visited. She always thanked me for every kindness. During their engagement, she often spoke about the importance of family. I thought Daniel had found someone who would strengthen the bonds between us. When they purchased their first home, I contributed the down payment. I never mentioned it publicly. I never wanted anyone to feel indebted. The official story became that Daniel and Vanessa had accomplished everything entirely on their own. I allowed that version to spread because I was proud of them. Success belongs more comfortably to younger people. Recognition mattered less to me than seeing my family thrive. As the years passed, however, subtle changes appeared. Vanessa became increasingly focused on appearances. Every gathering seemed designed to impress someone. Every purchase had to be larger, newer, or more exclusive than the previous one. Conversations that once centered on family gradually shifted toward status. Expensive vacations, luxury memberships, designer brands, private events. None of those things are wrong by themselves. What concerned me was the way people began to be measured according to what they owned. Looking back, I can now identify moments I ignored. Times when Vanessa seemed embarrassed by my modest lifestyle. Times when she laughed when I declined extravagant purchases. Times when she referred to successful people as valuable and ordinary people as invisible. Even then, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. I told myself she was young. I told myself she would mature. I told myself family was stronger than pride. Yet the memory that returned most often after the dinner involved a conversation. From 3 years earlier, we had been sitting on her patio after a holiday gathering. She asked why I still drove a 10-year-old sedan. I smiled and said it worked perfectly well. She laughed and replied, "People judge you by what they see." At the time, I answered with a simple joke. Now those words echoed differently. People judge you by what they see. Perhaps that was exactly what had happened at the restaurant. Vanessa looked at my simple clothes, my old handbag, my quiet lifestyle, and concluded that I had nothing worth respecting. What she never understood was that true wealth often moves silently. The following week, as I sorted through old documents in my study, I came across files containing decades of financial records. Loans, investments, guarantees, agreements. The foundation of 3 days after I found those old financial records, I received an unexpected invitation. Vanessa was hosting a charity luncheon at a luxury country club on the other side of the city. The event was being advertised as a celebration of community leadership and family values. Under normal circumstances, I would have declined. After what had happened at the restaurant, the last person I wanted to spend time with was Vanessa. Yet something about the invitation caught my attention. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was the growing realization that I needed to understand how deeply her attitude ran. So I decided to attend. I arrived a few minutes early and entered through the main lobby. The ballroom had not yet opened, and several guests were gathering near a private lounge area. I intended to check in quietly and find a seat. Instead, I heard a familiar voice from the hallway beyond the lounge. "Vanessa." Instinctively, I stopped. She was speaking with 2 women I recognized from previous family functions. The hallway separated us, and they could not see me. Their conversation was casual, the way people speak when they believe no one important is listening. "Honestly," Vanessa said with a laugh, "I do not know why some people refuse to accept reality." One of the women asked what she meant. Vanessa replied, "My mother-in-law still acts as if she belongs in important circles. She dresses like she shops at garage sales and carries that ancient handbag everywhere." The group laughed. I remained perfectly still. "You would think someone her age would understand appearances matter," Vanessa continued. "People judge what they see. If you look poor, people assume you are poor." Another woman asked whether Daniel still spent much time with me. Vanessa shrugged. "Not really. We are busy building our future. Besides, there is nothing she can contribute anymore." Those words settled over me like cold rain. Nothing she can contribute anymore. It was remarkable how confidently she spoke about matters she clearly did not understand. One woman lowered her voice. "I thought his family helped him when he was younger." Vanessa immediately dismissed the idea. "Not in any meaningful way. Daniel built everything himself." Again the others nodded. Again the conversation moved forward as though fiction had become fact. I quietly stepped away before they could notice me. My heart was not racing. I was not angry. Strangely, I felt calm. For weeks, I had wondered whether the humiliation at the restaurant had been a momentary lapse in judgment, whether stress or embarrassment had caused Vanessa to behave poorly. Now I knew better. The restaurant was not an exception. It was a reflection of what she genuinely believed. Throughout the luncheon, I observed more than I spoke. Vanessa moved from table to table accepting compliments and praise. She spoke often about generosity, respect, and community. Guests applauded her remarks. Some even described her as inspiring. The contrast was astonishing. By the time the event ended, I had learned everything I needed to know. That evening I returned home and opened the folder of financial documents again. This time I reviewed every page carefully. Investment agreements, property records, loan guarantees, business contracts. The deeper I looked, the clearer the picture became. Many of the opportunities Daniel enjoyed today existed because someone had quietly protected him during difficult years. Someone had absorbed risks when banks refused. Someone had provided resources when success was far from guaranteed. Yet, over time, those contributions had been erased from the family narrative. I closed the final folder and looked out the window at the setting sun. For years I had remained silent because I believed love required sacrifice. Perhaps it did. But I was beginning to understand that silence can also become permission. And for the first time since that humiliating evening, I made a decision. I would not argue. I would not seek revenge. I would simply make sure that the truth and the future built upon it reflected reality rather than entitlement. The following Monday, I scheduled a meeting with the one person who had seen every major chapter of my adult life. His name was Robert Klein, and he had served as my attorney for nearly 25 years. Robert was not impressed by wealth, titles, or family drama. He cared about facts. That was one reason I trusted him. When I arrived at his office, he greeted me warmly and immediately noticed the stack of folders under my arm. "This looks serious," he said as we sat across from each other in the conference room. "It is," I replied. For the next hour, we reviewed documents that stretched back decades. Investment records, property agreements, partnership contracts, personal loans that had quietly helped Daniel survive difficult years. Robert examined each page carefully. Occasionally he nodded. Occasionally he made notes. By the time we finished, several thick folders covered the conference table. "You were more involved than most people realize," he finally said. I smiled faintly. "Most people realize almost none of it." Robert leaned back in his chair. "Do Daniel and Vanessa understand the extent of these arrangements?" "No," I answered. "And judging by recent events, they have built an entire narrative around that ignorance." Robert remained silent for a moment. Then he asked a question that surprised me. "What exactly do you want to accomplish?" I looked out the window, overlooking downtown. The answer came easily. "I do not want revenge." He nodded. "Good. I want reality to matter again." Robert smiled slightly. "That is a healthier goal." We spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing my estate plans and various family trusts. Some had been established years earlier when Daniel was still building his career. Others had been updated periodically as circumstances changed. The more we reviewed, the clearer one fact became. Daniel and Vanessa had developed expectations about the future, expectations they treated almost as guarantees. Yet many of those assumptions existed only because I had never challenged them. I had allowed gratitude to become entitlement. I had allowed silence to become misunderstanding. When the meeting ended, Robert organized several documents into separate folders. "You have options," he said. "Significant options." "I thought you might say that." "The important thing," he continued, "is that whatever decisions you make should reflect your values, not your emotions from one painful evening." His advice stayed with me during the drive home. That night I sat alone in my study and thought about values. Family, responsibility, respect, accountability. None of those principles required anger. In fact, anger often made them harder to see. Over the next several weeks, I met with Robert multiple times. We reviewed charitable foundations I had supported for years, scholarship programs, community organizations, medical research initiatives, groups that used resources carefully and changed lives quietly. The more conversations we had, the more certain I became. Wealth should follow character. Opportunity should follow responsibility. Neither should be treated as an automatic reward for sharing a last name. Meanwhile, life continued as if nothing had happened. Social media posts from Vanessa appeared regularly. Photographs from expensive dinners, weekend trips, charity galas, celebrations. To anyone looking from the outside, everything seemed perfect. What fascinated me was how confident she appeared. There was no sign of reflection, no sign of regret, no apology. It was as though the dinner incident had already been forgotten. One afternoon, Robert called with an update. "Everything is prepared," he said. "The revisions can be finalized whenever you are ready." I thanked him and ended the call. Then I sat quietly in my garden, watching the afternoon sunlight move across the lawn. Birds landed near the fountain. A gentle breeze carried the scent of roses through the air. For the first time in months, I felt peaceful. Not because a plan for the future was taking shape, because I finally understood something important. The greatest mistake Vanessa had made was not insulting me. It was assuming she already knew my worth. And very soon, That assumption was going to face reality. The revisions were completed quietly. No announcements. No dramatic meetings. No confrontations. Just signatures, documents, and carefully considered decisions. Robert handled everything with the same professionalism he had shown for decades. Once the final paperwork was finished, he placed the last folder into his briefcase and looked at me across the conference table. "Are you comfortable with every change?" he asked. I reviewed the summary one final time. "Yes," I answered, and I meant it. The changes reflected months of reflection rather than a moment of anger. Certain family trusts remained intact. Several charitable foundations received expanded commitments. Scholarship programs gained additional funding. Community projects I had supported for years would continue long into the future. Most importantly, every decision now aligned with the values I wanted my legacy to represent. As I left Robert's office that afternoon, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not because I had taken something away from anyone, because I had finally stopped allowing other people to define what I owed them. For most of my life, I had confused generosity with obligation. The two are not the same. Generosity is a gift. Obligation is a debt. Somewhere along the way, Daniel and Vanessa had begun treating my generosity as though it were a permanent debt I owed them. A few weeks later, I received another invitation. This time it was for a large family celebration at Daniel and Vanessa's home. The occasion was supposedly a milestone anniversary for one of Vanessa's business achievements. Family members were encouraged to attend. The invitation was elegant, expensive, and impossible to miss. I considered declining. Then I realized something. For months, I had been stepping back and observing. The time for observation was ending. The time for understanding consequences was approaching. I mailed my acceptance card the next morning. As the event drew closer, small pieces of information reached me through relatives. Vanessa was planning an extravagant evening. Caterers had been hired. A live band was scheduled to perform. Local business leaders would attend. Several family members told me she seemed unusually excited about the future. One cousin even mentioned overhearing a conversation about inheritances and long-term family wealth. Apparently, many assumptions were being discussed very confidently. I listened politely and said very little. The truth no longer needed my defense. It simply needed patience. During that same period, Daniel finally called. It was the first meaningful conversation we had attempted since the restaurant incident. His voice sounded cautious. "Mom, we have not talked much lately." "No," I replied calmly. "We have not." There was a brief silence. Vanessa thinks things became awkward after that dinner. I almost laughed at the understatement. Awkward. What an interesting word for public humiliation. "I see," I said. Daniel hesitated. She did not mean anything serious by it. That sentence told me everything. Not because I believed it, because he believed it. Somewhere along the way, my son had become so accustomed to excusing disrespect that he no longer recognized it. "Daniel," I said gently, "do you remember who helped guarantee your first office lease?" Silence. "Yes." "Do you remember who paid the down payment on your first home?" Another silence. "Yes." "Do you remember who stood beside you when banks said no?" His answer came quietly. "Yes." I waited. Part of me hoped he would finally acknowledge what had happened. Instead, he changed the subject. We ended the conversation politely a few minutes later. Afterward, I sat alone in my garden for a long time. Strangely, I was not disappointed. I was simply certain. Daniel was not going to arrive at the truth on his own. Life was going to introduce him to it instead. And with the upcoming family gathering only weeks away, I had a feeling that moment was getting closer than anyone realized. The evening of the celebration arrived with the kind of polished elegance that was designed to impress. Strings of warm lights stretched across the backyard. Fresh flowers lined the walkways. Uniformed servers moved between guests carrying trays of appetizers and sparkling drinks. Luxury vehicles filled the driveway and spilled onto the street. Everything about the event projected success. As my car pulled up to the entrance, I noticed several relatives already gathered near the front lawn. Conversations paused briefly when they saw me arrive. Then smiles appeared. Genuine smiles. Over the past few months, many family members had quietly reached out to me. Some had heard versions of what happened at the restaurant. Others had witnessed enough behavior themselves to form their own conclusions. They greeted me warmly. I thanked them and entered the house. Vanessa stood near the center of the room, surrounded by guests. She looked confident, polished, and completely in control. The moment she noticed me, her expression tightened for only a fraction of a second before the practiced smile returned. "I am glad you could make it," she said. "Thank you for inviting me," I replied. Neither of us mentioned the past. We did not need to. The memory occupied the space between every word. Daniel soon joined us. He looked relieved that the greeting remained civil. Throughout the evening, I observed more than I spoke. People reveal themselves when they believe they are winning. Vanessa spent much of the night discussing future projects, future investments, future opportunities. Again and again, conversations drifted toward long-term family wealth. I noticed how often she spoke as though the future had already been guaranteed. Several guests nodded politely. Others exchanged uncertain glances. Confidence can be impressive. Overconfidence rarely is. At one point, I found myself standing near a group of relatives when Vanessa began describing plans for expanding certain properties and restructuring future assets. She spoke with remarkable certainty for someone who did not actually control any of those assets. One cousin quietly raised an eyebrow. Another looked toward me. I simply smiled and continued sipping my coffee. There was no need to interrupt. Truth has its own timing. Later in the evening, Daniel approached me privately. "Mom, can we talk for a minute?" We stepped onto a quiet section of the patio away from the music. For a moment, he looked like the young man I remembered from years ago rather than the businessman he had become. "I feel like something has changed," he admitted. "Something has changed," I answered. "You have been distant." I considered his words carefully. Distance often appears when respect disappears. He lowered his eyes. "I wish things were easier." "So do I." The conversation might have gone further, but several guests interrupted to congratulate him on the event. The moment passed. As Daniel walked away, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and acceptance. He was beginning to sense consequences. He simply did not understand their scale yet. Near the end of the evening, a local business owner whom I had known for years approached me. We discussed charitable programs, scholarship initiatives, and community projects. Our conversation lasted nearly 20 minutes. During that time, I noticed Vanessa watching us from across the room several times. Curiosity had finally replaced certainty. That observation interested me. People become nervous when information exists outside their control. As guests slowly began leaving, Vanessa thanked everyone for attending. Applause filled the room. Smiles appeared for photographs. Glasses were raised for one final toast. To anyone watching from the outside, the evening looked like a tremendous success. Yet as I prepared to leave, I sensed something shifting beneath the surface. Assumptions were beginning to collide with reality. Questions were beginning to replace confidence. And somewhere beyond the music, the speeches, and the carefully staged appearances, a much larger revelation was moving steadily closer. The plans were complete. The documents were secure. The future had already changed. The only thing left was for the people most affected by those changes to finally discover what had been decided. 2 weeks after the celebration, Robert called and asked whether I would be available for a scheduled family review meeting that had originally been planned months earlier. The meeting was routine in theory. Every few years, certain legal structures, trusts, and charitable commitments were reviewed with relevant family members present. Historically, these meetings attracted little interest. This year was different. "I suspect attendance will be excellent," Robert said dryly. I smiled because I understood exactly what he meant. Word had quietly spread that future planning discussions would be taking place. Expectations were growing. Assumptions were multiplying. The meeting was scheduled for a Friday afternoon at Robert's office. When the day arrived, I entered the conference room and immediately noticed the atmosphere. Daniel was already there. Vanessa sat beside him. Several other relatives occupied seats around the long table. Coffee cups rested near leather folders. Polite greetings filled the room. Yet beneath the surface, something else existed. Anticipation. Everyone seemed to believe they were about to receive confirmation of things they had already decided were true. Robert entered precisely on time, carrying several organized binders. After welcoming everyone, he began reviewing general family planning matters. Charitable initiatives were discussed first. Community investments followed. Educational programs came next. Vanessa listened patiently for a while, but I could see her growing restless. These subjects clearly were not what interested her. Finally, after nearly 40 minutes, she asked a question. "Will there be discussion of future beneficiary allocations?" The room became noticeably quieter. Robert looked at her calmly. There will be discussion of updated planning structures, he answered. Vanessa nodded and leaned back with visible satisfaction. Daniel remained silent. Robert continued his presentation. One by one, he reviewed various updates that had been finalized over recent months. Several charitable foundations had received expanded commitments. Scholarship programs had been strengthened. Long-term community projects had gained additional resources. Each announcement generated respectful approval from those present. Yet with every page Robert turned, I noticed Vanessa becoming increasingly confused. The conversation was not moving in the direction she expected. Finally, she interrupted again. "I am sorry," she said, forcing a smile. "But when will we discuss the family inheritance structure?" Robert adjusted his glasses. "We are discussing it now." The confusion on her face deepened. He opened another folder and continued. Detailed explanations followed regarding how future resources would be distributed across charitable, educational, and community commitments. The percentages were clear. The priorities were clear. Most importantly, the reasoning behind every decision was clear. No drama, no emotion, just carefully documented choices. Several relatives appeared impressed. Others seemed thoughtful. Daniel listened more closely with each passing minute. Vanessa remained unusually still. Then Robert reached the final section. "These revisions reflect the wishes and values of the grantor," he explained. "The objective is to support responsibility, service, education, and community impact for future generations." Silence settled across the room. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence that follows understanding. For years, certain people had viewed the future as an entitlement. Now they were discovering it had always been a choice. Vanessa finally spoke. "When were these decisions made?" Robert answered immediately. "Over a period of several months following extensive review." Her eyes shifted toward me. For the first time since the restaurant incident, genuine uncertainty replaced confidence. She was beginning to realize that assumptions had consequences. Daniel looked between us, saying nothing. His expression revealed something I had not seen in a very long time. Reflection, not defensiveness, not excuses. Reflection. As the meeting continued, questions were asked and answered professionally. No arguments occurred. No accusations were made. The facts. The meeting ended quietly, but its impact continued long after everyone left the conference room. As people gathered their coats and exchanged polite goodbyes, I noticed a change in the atmosphere. The confidence that had filled the room earlier had faded. In its place stood reflection. Reality has a remarkable way of clearing away assumptions. Daniel approached me near the elevator. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence felt different from the silences we had shared over recent months. This one carried honesty rather than avoidance. "Mom," he finally said, "I think I understand some things now that I did not understand before." I looked at him carefully. Understanding is a good place to begin. He nodded slowly. I should have paid more attention. There was regret in his voice, but also something more important. Accountability. Not excuses. Not explanations. Accountability. For the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful about my son. Growth rarely begins with certainty. It begins when someone becomes willing to question their own assumptions. Before leaving, Daniel surprised me again. "I am sorry for not speaking up when I should have." The words were simple. They were not dramatic. Yet they mattered more than any speech could have. I placed my hand gently on his shoulder. "Thank you." Nothing else needed to be said. Some conversations begin healing because they are long. Others begin healing because they are honest. As Daniel stepped away, Vanessa remained near the conference table, speaking quietly with Robert. Her expression had changed dramatically from the confident certainty she carried during the family celebration. She no longer looked angry. She looked unsettled. Perhaps for the first time, she was confronting the difference between expectation and reality. A few minutes later, she approached me. "May I speak with you?" she asked. I agreed. We sat across from each other in a small conference room. The same woman who had once dismissed me publicly now seemed unsure how to begin. Eventually, she spoke. "I think I misjudged some things." It was not a perfect apology. It was not even a complete apology. But it was more honesty than I had heard from her in a very long time. "Perhaps," I replied gently. She lowered her eyes. "I thought I understood how everything worked." "Many people think that," I answered, "until they learn more." She nodded. The conversation remained brief. There were no dramatic confessions, no emotional speeches. Real life rarely works that way. People change gradually. Understanding arrives one realization at a time. When I finally left Robert's office, the afternoon sun was shining brightly over the city. I walked slowly toward my car and felt something I had not felt since before the restaurant incident. Peace. Not because anyone had lost something. Not because I had won some invisible contest. Because the truth had finally been allowed to exist openly. In the months that followed, life settled into a healthier rhythm. The charitable projects continued growing. Scholarship recipients wrote letters describing their accomplishments. Community programs expanded. New opportunities appeared for people who truly needed them. Those outcomes brought me far more satisfaction than any inheritance discussion ever could. Daniel and I gradually rebuilt our relationship through conversations, dinners, and honest effort. Trust takes time to repair, but effort matters. As for Vanessa, she changed more slowly. Yet over time, even she seemed to recognize that respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned. Looking back now, I sometimes think about that evening when I was treated like an outsider at my own family gathering. At the time, the experience felt humiliating. Today, I see it differently. It revealed truths that might otherwise have remained hidden for years. It exposed character. It exposed assumptions. Most importantly, it forced everyone involved to decide what truly mattered. Money can create opportunities. Property can create comfort. But neither creates respect. Respect grows from gratitude, humility, and character. Those are treasures no legal document can distribute. And in the end, that became the most valuable legacy of all.